at least not in any way that made sense to Julian. Her body was still, her skin as cold as the wind clawing at his face. Her head lolled against his chest as he stumbled through the white fury. It felt like carrying a statue sculpted from ice, delicate, beautiful, and far too easy to break. "Stay with me," he gasped, his own breath a ghostly vapor. "Just a little further, please." Behind him, the wrecked car was already vanishing into the storm. Before him, his old truck blinked weakly, its headlights fading in and out through, the snow like eyes struggling to stay open. Inside that truck, barely visible through the swirling chaos, was the only thing Julian cared about more than his own life: his daughter. Julian Hale, a black man, hadn't expected anything from the world in a long time. Not kindness, not miracles, and certainly not second chances. Life had made sure of that. He was 36, though the lines around his eyes told a rougher tale. A mechanic by trade, he worked 6 days a week in a drafty, dim garage just outside the frozen Montana town of Miller's Ridge. The cold wasn't new. The struggle wasn't new. The loneliness. That had become a permanent tenant the day cancer took his wife Claire. But Daisy, 6 years old, bright-eyed and full of questions, kept him moving. Her laughter made it easier to forget the sound of machines breaking down, the bitter notices from the power company, and the creaking silence in their home at night. Every week was a slow grind. Wake up before dawn, fix dead engines, smile for Daisy, sleep a little, then do it all again. He didn't complain. There was no one to complain to. Rose Miles had never driven herself across the countryside. That was what drivers were for. But this week had been different. She had walked out of her own board meeting in Boston, shivering not from the cold, but from exhaustion. For once, she'd said no to the press, the parties, the private jet. She wanted silence, solitude, something real. So she had rented a Range Rover, peeled off her tailored coat, and vanished north. The press wouldn't care, not yet. They only followed her when she wanted them to. At 34, Rose was the CEO of Solstice Automotive, a billion-dollar name that built sleek machines for people who didn't think twice about luxury. And yet here she was, lost on a mountain road, cold, terrified, and, most humiliatingly, completely powerless. The engine had coughed once, then died. No signal, no movement on the road, and now, no feeling in her hands. When the headlights appeared through the white, she thought she was imagining them, a hallucination. But then the door opened, and she saw his face. Not an angel, just a man with oil on his boots and fire in his eyes. The blizzard had arrived without warning, not a gentle drift of snowflakes, but a brutal wall of white slamming across the mountains like a wave. The forecast had been clear, some flurries, light winds. Nothing alarming. Julian had worked late and barely made it in time to pick up Daisy from the sitters. She'd been waiting by the window, wrapped in her faded galaxy print blanket, her cheeks pink with cold, her smile wide. Now she slept again in the back seat, mouth slightly open, one hand curled around her stuffed lion Leo. Julian could barely see 5 feet ahead. His knuckles were white on the wheel. The heater groaned uselessly. The road was a ribbon of vanishing ink, erased as fast as his tires drew it. But he knew these hills. He knew this snow. It was his enemy, but a familiar one. Then he saw it. A flicker of orange, pulsing weakly through the white. He slowed, instinct sharper than thought. A vehicle, black, expensive, half buried, in a snowdrift off the shoulder. Hazard lights blinking like a dying heartbeat. He pulled ahead, carefully, the truck groaning in protest. Before getting out, he checked Daisy, still sleeping. He adjusted her blanket and kissed her forehead. Then he stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit like a hammer, slicing through his jacket, chewing into his skin. He moved fast, boots crunching ice, eyes narrowing against the gale. He reached the driver's side and pounded on the window. "Hey, you okay?" No answer. He cupped his hands against the glass and peered in. A figure slumped over the steering wheel, hair tangled, unmoving. A woman. The SUV's passenger. Door didn't budge. Julian Hale hurried around the vehicle, boots crunching on the thick snow as he reached the other side. He grabbed the handle. Locked. His eyes darted up and noticed the window. Cracked just an inch. Not much, but enough. Enough for hope. Enough for a lifeline. Without hesitation, Julian turned and sprinted toward his old truck, lungs heaving, in the ice-cold air. Snowflakes whipped across his face like needles. He flung the driver's door open, dropped to his knees, and reached under the seat. His fingers closed around a cold steel shaft, the crowbar. He raced back, crowbar gripped like a weapon against time. Back at the SUV, the wind howled around him like some ancient beast. He jammed the crowbar's flat end into the windows. Gap, teeth clenched. One push, a twist, resistance, then click. The door lock snapped open with a sound sharp as a gunshot in the storm. The door swung outward. Inside, Rose Miles collapsed sideways toward the opening, her limp body surrendering to gravity. Julian caught her before she hit the snow. "Whoa, easy," he murmured, pulling her into his arms. Her skin was like ice. Her lips had lost all color, her face pale as the world outside. Julian pressed his fingers to her neck. Searching. There. A weak, thready pulse. She was alive. Barely. No time for questions. No time for wonder. Whoever this woman was, rich, poor, famous, forgotten, she was human. She needed saving. Julian lifted her in both arms, surprised by how light she felt beneath all those expensive clothes. Her head lolled against his shoulder. He turned and staggered back to the truck, snow piling around his boots with each step. The wind fought him. The cold gnawed at him. But he didn't stop. Back at the truck, he opened the passenger door and lowered Rose into the seat, nudging aside empty coffee cups and scattered tools. He shrugged out of his own coat, threadbare, patched, and tucked it around her. It wasn't much, but it was something. He cranked the heat to the max. The old engine wheezed, struggling to push out warmth. The cab trembled as the blizzard screamed outside, shaking the windows. Julian looked at the woman beside him, still breathing, still here. Then he glanced in the rearview mirror. Daisy. His daughter stirred beneath her star-covered blanket. One sleepy eye blinked open, lashes sticky with sleep. She sat up, her little face pale in the dim light. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Who's that?" Julian looked back at Rose, then at his daughter. "Someone who needs help," he said, softly. "She got caught in the storm." Daisy yawned and nodded, then curled back under her blanket, hugging her teddy bear close. Julian shifted the truck into gear. The tires slipped. Caught. Slipped again. The road ahead was no longer a road, just a swirling white abyss. But he drove, because that's what he did. The last mile was a crawl through a frozen maze. Gravel road leading to the cabin had vanished beneath heavy snow. Julian Hale gripped the wheel tighter, muscles aching. The truck fought for traction. The engine growled in protest. Every few feet the tires spun, spat slush, caught again. Inside, silence. Except the weak hiss of the heater, the storm shrieking around them, and the shallow breaths coming from the woman beside him. Rose Miles lay wrapped in his coat, her body still and small in the passenger seat. Julian focused on the road, what little of it he could see. Then, through the curtain of snow, a light. The porch. Home. The cabin stood squat and stubborn against the storm, its rusted metal roof shedding snow in long, heavy sheets. Golden light flickered behind fogged windows. Smoke curled from the chimney. He pulled up close, left the engine, running. Every drop of warmth mattered. Julian ran around to the passenger side and gently lifted Rose again. She was colder than before, her weight limp in his arms. He kicked open the door with one heavy boot and stepped inside. The cabin swallowed them in dry stillness. The wind silenced. The air smelled of pine smoke, stale coffee, and the faint sweetness of cheap cinnamon from the plug-in by the door. Not much, but it was home. Julian Hale carried Rose Miles straight into the heart of their little cabin, the living room. It was a small space, but it held warmth deeper than what fire alone could provide. The couch in the middle sagged from years of use, its cushions worn into the familiar shape of two people who had leaned on it through countless winters. In the corner, a cast-iron wood stove glowed softly, breathing out thick waves of heat that seemed to embrace the room. He gently lowered Rose onto the couch, careful not to jostle her more than necessary. Her head found rest on a pair of faded throw pillows, their patterns dulled by time, but softened by years of comfort. The room around them was humble, patched. Together through seasons of survival and love, the walls bore signs of repairs, uneven paint here, a crack filled there. A hand-woven rug stretched across the floor, its edges fraying like the hem of a cherished old sweater. In one corner, a small wooden shelf held a crooked stack of Daisy's picture books, their colorful spines leaning slightly like they were listening. It wasn't stylish, it wasn't polished, but it was real, a room built by necessity, softened by care. Kneeling beside the couch, Julian carefully pulled off Rose's snow-covered designer boots. The moment the boots came off, he frowned. Her socks were thin and soaked through, completely useless against this kind of cold. Her toes looked nearly frostbitten, pale and still. He cupped her feet in his big, weather-worn hands, rubbing gently, trying to coax warmth back into them. Then he stood, crossed to a basket near the stove, and pulled out a pair of thick gray wool socks, his own. He returned and eased them onto her icy feet with careful hands, like he was dressing something fragile. He stood, grabbed the patchwork quilt from the back of the couch, the one his grandmother had sewn decades ago. The fabric was worn at the seams, but the colors still held. Blues, reds, faded yellows, stitched into a story only the Hale family remembered. He tucked the quilt snugly around Rose's legs, folding it up to her chest, wrapping her in warmth and history. "Daddy?" Daisy's small voice came from the hallway. She stood in the doorway with her star blanket draped over her shoulders like a cape. Her messy hair clung to one cheek, and in her arms she held her one-eyed teddy bear. Her feet were bare, but she didn't seem to notice the cold. Her wide brown eyes locked onto the woman lying on the couch. She wasn't sleepy anymore, just still, watching. Julian looked up. "It's okay, sweetie," he said, his voice soft. Daisy shuffled closer, dragging the corner of her blanket behind her like a comet's tail. She stopped a few feet away, from the couch, clutching her bear tighter. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "She looks like a giant burrito, Daddy." Julian chuckled quietly, the sound low and warm. Despite the worry pressing against his ribs, his daughter still had a way of lighting a spark in the darkest rooms. "Something like that, Button," he said. "She just got really cold." Daisy nodded, considering. "Was it the snow? Did her car break?" Her tone wasn't exactly a question. It was more like a declaration. In her world, her daddy could fix anything. His truck never broke. That was just truth. "Sometimes even the fanciest cars get stuck," Julian said. "Blizzards don't care how shiny your wheels are." Daisy hugged her teddy closer, lips slightly pursed. She didn't say more, just stood there, like a tiny guardian watching over the stranger in their living room. Julian turned toward the little kitchen tucked into the corner of the room. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove to boil. The water would take a few minutes, but the soft heat of chamomile tea might help Rose wake up. He reached for a mug, fingers brushing against the familiar chipped edge. Then, a sound, a low moan. He spun around. Rose's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Her eyes, a sharp, icy blue, flicked around the unfamiliar room, filled with confusion. Then the fear came fast. Her body tensed, lips parted, though no sound escaped yet. She tried to sit up and winced, her hand going to her ribs. Julian lifted both hands, his posture calm. "Hey," he said gently. "It's okay. You're safe now." She blinked, as if trying to see through the fog in her brain. Her mouth moved. A rough whisper scraped out. "Where?" "You passed out in your car. I found you on Route 47, he said, taking a step closer but not too close. "You were freezing. I brought you here." She blinked again. Her gaze settled on the crackling stove, then the quilt covering her legs, then Daisy, peeking from behind her bear. "Where am I?" she asked, voice hoarse. "My place," Julian said. "Julian Hale. That's my daughter, Daisy." Daisy waved a shy hand. Rose's eyes softened for just a moment. "Rose Miles," she whispered. Thank you." Julian shrugged slightly. "Couldn't just leave you out there." He turned, went back to the stove, and poured the now boiling water into the mug. A tea bag steeped instantly, releasing a calming floral scent. He added a spoonful of honey from the old jar on the counter and stirred gently. He brought the mug back and offered it to her. "It's chamomile," he said. "It might help warm you up." Rose hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers. The warmth radiated through the ceramic. Her hands were still ghostly white, knuckles stiff. She took a sip. "Thank you," she murmured again. Then, almost embarrassed, she added with a faint smile, "I usually drink this organic chamomile blend, imported of course, but this smells warm." Julian nodded, not quite sure how to respond. He stepped back, giving her space. As she sipped again, a little more color returned to her cheeks. Her eyes roamed the room once more, this time with more curiosity than panic. Her breathing began to steady. Julian watched her quietly. Even wrapped in an old quilt on a second-hand couch, Rose Miles carried herself with the kind of composure that couldn't be bought or shaken. There was something about her, a posture, a glance, the quiet way her fingers held the warm mug, that spoke of boardrooms, decisions, control. But now that aura flickered under the soft light of a storm-worn cabin. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, absorbing the space as if she were gathering details for a report. She took in the lopsided bookshelf that Julian had built with his own hands. Imperfect, but solid. Her gaze lingered on the crayon drawing tacked above it. A bright, wobbly picture of a tree and two stick figures labeled Daddy and Me, clearly drawn by Daisy in kindergarten. The scent of pine smoke clung to the air, cozy and grounded, far removed from the sterile chill of her own world. Then her eyes found the photograph. It sat quietly on the mantel above the stove, framed simply, in wood. A younger Julian smiled out from it, exhaustion and pride fighting for space on his face. In his arms, wrapped snug in a pink blanket, was Daisy as a baby. Beside him stood a woman, her hair dark, her expression warm and radiant, her arm looped through Julian's like it had always belonged there. Ella. Rose didn't ask. She didn't need to. The moment she saw that picture, the air changed. The weight of a story, untold but deeply lived, hung heavy in the silence. Julian felt it too. He didn't need to look to know her eyes were on him. His jaw tightened, and he turned away, crouching unnecessarily by the stove to add another log to the fire. The blaze flared gently, but the chill that settled in his chest was beyond the reach of any flame. Ella's absence was a wound that never quite healed. Not when you saw her smile in your daughter's eyes, not when you heard her laugh echoing in the quiet after bedtime stories. And somehow, Rose saw that now. In the stillness carved out by the storm, the boundaries between them thinned. Two lives, one forged in routine survival, the other sculpted in polished control, briefly touched in the place where grief made all people equal. Rose didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her silence was understanding. It was the first brick in a quiet bridge between strangers. Outside, the world had transformed. Morning hadn't arrived with golden sunlight or singing birds. It had crept in, slow and tentative, like someone afraid to knock. The storm had passed, leaving everything blanketed in untouched white. The pines outside the window stood tall and quiet, like soldiers at rest after battle. And everything was still, painfully, beautifully still. Inside, the fire in the stove had softened to a bed of warm embers, and the cracks between two very different lives had begun to show, not as faults, but as places where light might one day shine through. Julian Hale was already outside, bundled, against the crisp bite of morning. Steam puffed from his mouth in steady clouds as he worked beside the half-buried Range Rover. His movements were careful and precise, not rushed, not sloppy. He approached the vehicle like a man performing surgery, respectful and efficient. He'd already cleared the snow from under the chassis, dug out the tires, and now stood with the hood propped open, his toolbox nestled nearby in a snowbank. Rose watched from the living room window, her breath fogging the glass. The chaos of last night had faded, leaving behind a clear view of her rescuer. Not just in body, but in nature. There was strength in how he worked, not the loud, boastful kind, but the kind that came from repetition and necessity. He moved like someone who didn't waste effort, someone who knew what mattered. Daisy, bundled in her tiny coat and snow hat, stood beside him. She handed him a wrench with great seriousness, her little mittened hands gripping it like it was sacred. Julian took it, ruffled her hair, and gave her a look of fondness that softened the hard lines of his face. From inside, Rose felt something, strange stir in her chest, a quiet pang, unfamiliar but deeply real. It wasn't envy, it wasn't regret. It was longing for something simpler, for something true, a life with less noise and more meaning. Later, Daisy came back inside with rosy cheeks and excitement in her steps. She proudly handed Rose a crumpled drawing, a snowman with stick arms and a lopsided smile. Rose smiled, really smiled, as she took the paper like it was a work of art. In that moment, it was. She noticed the absence of plastic toys, the patched elbow on Daisy's sweater. But she also saw the way Daisy's eyes sparkled, the ease with which she laughed, the closeness between her and Julian. And it struck her. This little home, so modest and threadbare, was overflowing with something her world had always lacked. Love that didn't need polish. Julian returned a short while later, stamping snow from his boots. He nodded toward the driveway, where the Range Rover now sat a little prouder. "She's good to go," he said plainly. Battery was frozen. Solid. Fuel sensor too, probably. I warmed them both up, cleaned the terminals, got it turning again. Rose stood up slowly, still a bit sore, but clear-headed now. She took a few steady steps toward him. "Julian, I don't even know how to thank you," she said. "Not just for the car. For everything." He shrugged, already reaching for the coffee pot warming on the edge of the stove. "Glad you're okay. Out here, storms like that, but you don't leave people behind." He nodded toward the kitchen table. "Still some soup left from last night?" "It's the official Hale family winter survival special." Rose chuckled gently. "It was perfect," she said. Thank you. Then, as if remembering who she was, what she came from, she reached into her coat pocket, damp with melted snow, and pulled out her wallet. This is the least I can do, she said, already tugging out a few bills. For your time. For the repair. For the tow I would have needed. Julian raised a hand before the money even cleared her fingers. No, ma'am, he said. Not necessary. Rose blinked, caught off guard. But I insist. In your world, maybe, Julian replied calmly. In mine, we look out for each other. No price tag on that. He sipped his coffee. His quiet strength seemed to fill the room, not demanding, just solid. Rose lowered her hand slowly, tucking the money back into her coat. She wasn't offended. She was moved. This wasn't performative kindness. This wasn't a sales pitch. This was principle. In my world, she said softly, everyone always wants something in return. Julian gave a wry smile. Mine too, sometimes, especially lately. Folks like me, it's been a rough year. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. The wear in his boots, the scar across his knuckles, the worry tucked behind his smile. It all spoke loud enough. Trying to meet him halfway, Rose tilted her head and offered, So, diagnosing a car engine? Is that kind of like reading a quarterly report? Just with more grease and fewer board meetings? Julian laughed, a low, surprised sound. Something like that, he said, though engines tend to lie less. The warmth between them flickered, easy and real, a shared moment. Not romance. Not yet, but something flickered. Rose knew she'd have to leave soon. Her calendar didn't wait. Her clients didn't pause for snow. But for just one moment longer, she stayed exactly where she was, in the warmth of a house built by calloused hands and honest hearts, and she wasn't quite ready to go. Well, Rose said, steadying her voice as she reached into her wallet, if you won't take money. She pulled out a slim, matte cream business card and held it out to Julian. This is me, she added. Rose Miles, CEO of Blackridge Automotive Group. Julian took the card slowly, eyebrows lifting just slightly at the name embossed in elegant silver lettering. He didn't say much, just gave a small nod and slipped the card into the breast pocket of his old flannel shirt. Inside that pocket, next to Rose's polished business card, was a very different kind of paper, a crumpled hospital bill. The final notice from Daisy's pneumonia scare last winter, a figure that made Julian's throat tighten every time. He looked at it. A figure that had lingered, unpaid, like a shadow behind every paycheck since. If you ever truly need anything, Rose said, putting quiet weight behind the words. I mean anything, car-related or otherwise. Please, don't hesitate. I owe you more than I can ever repay. Julian met her eyes. Appreciate it, Ms. Miles, he said with quiet formality. The title sounded strange on his tongue after the storm-born intimacy of their last 24 hours. Drive safe. Roads'll still be slick in places. She nodded, fastening her coat. Thank you again, Julian. And Daisy. Her smile was soft but full, directed at the little girl peeking from behind the doorway. Daisy smiled back, shy and open, her hand wrapped around her favorite stuffed bear. The cold hit Rose again as she stepped outside, but it no longer felt cruel. The Range Rover started up with a smooth, confident purr, thanks to Julian's handiwork. And as she slid into the driver's seat, the familiar luxury of leather and touchscreen suddenly felt sterile, cold, distant from the warmth she had just left. She glanced into the rearview mirror. Julian stood in the doorway, Daisy pressed against his side, one small hand waving goodbye. He didn't wave back, just stood there, watching, his face unreadable. Maybe it was relief. Maybe it was something deeper. But whatever it was, it gripped Rose's chest tighter than she expected. Their eyes met one final time in the mirror, a shared glance, a quiet question neither of them spoke aloud. Then Rose shifted into gear, the tires crunching over the packed snow, and the little cabin began to shrink behind her. The man who had saved her life. The child with stars on her blanket. The fire. The tea. The quiet dignity. Gone, but not forgotten. As the Range Rover curved down the drive, Rose felt something unfamiliar settle over her. She was leaving, but something inside her was staying. The scent of wood smoke, the taste of simple soup, the feeling of being helped, without expectation. A kind of kindness she couldn't buy, couldn't earn. And as the snow-covered road stretched ahead, clean and bright, Rose Miles realized her life, with all its control and certainty, had shifted in ways no GPS could ever track. Weeks slipped by. The blizzard became a story people in Pinefield told over diner coffee and greasy breakfasts. Life moved on. Snowbanks shrank, then grew again with each new storm. And for Julian Hale, that surreal night began to feel like a strange, soft dream. The rhythm of survival resumed. Early mornings at Parker's garage, long days beneath hoods and engines, late nights helping Daisy with her spelling homework while soup simmered on the stove. He patched the leaky corner of the roof, paid what he could on the heating bill, even found time to fix the broken hinge on Daisy's dresser. But the silence Rose left behind echoed more than he expected. Kindness, he'd learned, had a short memory in winter. The sun came out, and the world returned to its cold calculations. One gray afternoon, as clouds piled heavy in the sky, Mr. Parker called Julian into the small office behind the shop. The space smelled of burnt coffee and old receipts. The older man scratched his beard, not meeting Julian's eyes. "Julian," he started, voice low. "You know things have been slow lately. Fewer cars coming in, folks holding on to their money. I hate to do this, really, but I gotta cut back on hours. Not just you, everyone." Julian stood still, not surprised, but the words still landed like a punch to the gut. He nodded once. "How many hours?" Parker exhaled. "At least a third. Maybe more if things don't pick up by next month." Julian didn't argue, didn't complain, just nodded again. "Thanks for the heads up," he said, and walked out into the cold air that stung sharper than it had in weeks. That evening, Daisy was curled up on the couch drawing pictures, humming to herself. Julian sat at the kitchen table under the dim light, the month's bills spread before him. The hospital invoice for Daisy's pneumonia last winter, still unpaid. The heating bill, rent, groceries. He did the math, then did it again. It didn't add up. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, trying not to let the panic rise. His hands dropped into his lap and touched something in the breast pocket of his flannel shirt. He pulled it out slowly. That same cream-colored business card. Smooth, elegant, unassuming. Rose Miles, CEO, Blackridge Automotive Group. He stared at it for a long time, but he didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, didn't speak. Outside, the snow began to fall again, quietly this time. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to be the man who called for help. But he wasn't just thinking about himself. He thought of Daisy, of her laugh, her questions, her soft breathing when she slept. He thought of the cold creeping into the corners of the house, the pantry that was running a little too empty, and the look in her eyes when she asked if everything was okay. He took a breath and dialed. It rang. Once, twice, a third time. Then a smooth, professional voice answered. "You've reached the offices of Blackridge Automotive Group. Please listen carefully, as our menu options have changed." Julian blinked. The voice droned on. He pressed 3 for the executive suite, then 1 for Rose Miles's office. Finally, another voice answered. Younger, brisker. "Ms. Miles's office, this is Natalie. How may I direct your call?" He cleared his throat. Yes. Hi, my name is Julian Hale. Ms. Miles gave me her card a while back. Said to call if I ever needed anything." There was a pause. He could almost hear her flipping through a mental Rolodex. "And this is regarding?" she asked, her tone polite but cool. Julian felt the weight of everything he wanted to say press against his chest. "How do you ask for help without sounding like you're begging?" "Well, ma'am, it's a little complicated. I work at a garage. My hours just got cut way back. And I've got this hospital bill. For my daughter. From last winter. He stopped, hating how small he sounded. "I'm just trying to figure out what my options are." There was a short pause. "One moment, Mr. Hale," she said, and the line went quiet except for the tinkling notes of hold music. He sat there, phone pressed to his ear, staring at the chipped edge of the kitchen table. Then the music stopped. A familiar voice came on the line. "Julian?" It was Rose. Her voice was calm, controlled, but he could hear it. The faint shift in tone. Recognition, surprise, and something else. "Is everything all right?" He swallowed hard. I didn't want to bother you," he said, trying to steady his voice. "It's just, things are tight, right now. And you said if I ever needed—" "Of course," she interrupted gently. "You're not bothering me. I meant it." There was a silence, not uncomfortable, just full of something unspoken. Then she said more formally, "We do have a charitable foundation at Blackridge. It handles community assistance. If you'd like, I can have my assistant send over the application materials." "Forms?" he repeated, the word landing like a stone in his stomach. "It's a fairly simple process," she said, perhaps sensing his hesitation. "Just a way to document the request. It helps us stay organized." The words landed with a sting, sharper than Rose Miles intended, and far colder than Julian Hale expected. The moment she mentioned a corporate foundation, it was as if the warmth between them vanished. His chest tightened as though he'd stepped back into that frozen storm, the weight of misunderstanding settling like frost in his lungs. Julian's voice came out, stiff, brittle. "No, thank you, Miss Miles. That won't be necessary. Sorry to have taken up your time." And just like that, the call ended. No farewell. No chance for Rose to explain, to backtrack, to soften the sterile language she'd defaulted to. The line went dead, and in the silence of his modest kitchen, Julian stared at the phone, his knuckles white where they gripped it. He set the phone down gently, but the disappointment struck hard. Not at Rose, not exactly. At himself. For thinking, even for a heartbeat, that someone like her might understand. That she might see him not as a line item, but as a man. A father. He slipped the business card back into the flannel shirt pocket and let out a slow breath. The light above the kitchen table flickered once, a reminder of bills that wouldn't wait. Miles away, Rose Miles sat in her sleek glass-walled office, phone still in her hand. The call had left a chill she couldn't shake. She replayed the conversation, dissecting each word, each silence. His voice, so open at first, then closing down like a door slammed shut. She should have said more, should have recognized the vulnerability behind his carefully measured words. Instead, she'd reached for the tools she knew, structure, process, protocol. But Julian Hale wasn't an acquisition. He wasn't an underperforming division. He was a man who had pulled her from an overturned car with bare hands and no hesitation. And now, thanks to her clinical response, he probably thought she'd never seen him as anything but a project. The dissonance between who she was in that Montana cabin and who she'd just sounded like on the phone gnawed at her. For 2 days, Rose tried to bury it beneath meetings and charts, profit forecasts, and analyst calls. But the memory of Julian, his steady gaze, the way he tucked that quilt around her, the quiet way he moved through the world, kept returning. This wasn't a strategic dilemma. It was something else, something human. And it was unfinished. By the third morning, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She told her assistant to cancel her afternoon and took a car from the company pool. Not her luxury SUV, just a neutral sedan, something humble. The drive to Pinefield was long, but the roads were clear. The sky hung low and gray, winter still clinging to the edges of everything. The mountain stood silent, distant sentinels against a pale horizon. She drove past fields buried in snow, fences half hidden. The world paused in cold stillness. The town of Pinefield appeared like a memory materializing out of fog, smaller than she'd remembered. Or maybe she'd just been looking through a different lens the last time. She didn't go straight to the garage. Instead, she walked into a diner next door, a worn place with a faded sign and a bell that jingled when the door opened. The woman behind the counter gave her a curious glance, then smiled. "Coffee?" "Yes, please," Rose said. "Actually, I was wondering about the garage next door. I met someone who works there, Julian Hale." The woman's face softened. "Good man, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, raising a little girl on his own." Rose blinked. "He's a single father?" "Wife passed a few years back. Cancer. Real tough time. Daisy's her name. Sweet kid. Smart as a whip." The woman leaned forward, dropping her voice. "They've had it. Rough lately. Clinic bills and all. Heard Parker had to cut his hours. Not much business coming through with folks struggling around here." Rose nodded, her throat tight. The quiet pride Julian had shown, the way he'd shrugged off thanks, the refusal of charity, it all clicked into sharper focus. She left a generous tip and stepped back into the cold. Each piece of information landed like a small blow, dismantling Rose's lingering defenses and whatever doubt she had left. She hadn't misread Julian in the storm. She had misread him on the phone. That afternoon, she found him where she somehow knew he would be, in the garage, under the hood of a stubborn old pickup truck, working in silence after everyone else had gone home. The wide bay doors were pulled halfway down against the cold, and the air inside hung heavy with the scent of motor oil, old metal, and the low hum of an aging fluorescent light overhead. She didn't announce herself immediately. She watched, for a moment, letting the sounds of the town fade behind the rhythm of tools and quiet grit. Then, softly, she spoke. "Julian." "Miss Miles," he said evenly, his voice stripped of the warmth she'd once heard in it. "Wasn't expecting you." She stepped forward, the heels of her boots muted on the oil-stained concrete. She didn't flinch, at the chill that crept into her coat or the distance in his eyes. "Julian," she began quietly, "I came to apologize." He paused, still holding the rag, brow furrowing. "For the phone call," she continued. "I wasn't listening. I went into executive mode. It was thoughtless." Julian said nothing, only watching her, the silence thick. "I assumed you were asking for help the way I'm used to hearing it," she went on, her voice softer now. "Calculated, expectant. I forgot there are people who ask because they have no other option, and it costs them something just to dial the number." His arms crossed slowly over his chest. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the earlier bite. It was low, almost tired. "I wasn't asking for a handout, Rose, just options. I didn't even know what I was asking for, to be honest. Things have been tight, real tight." He looked down for a beat, then back at her. "Ella, my wife, she fought for 2 years. Hospital bills don't just vanish when the funeral ends." Rose nodded, eyes steady. I know that part of the story now. The diner next door filled in the blanks. Julian gave a short, humorless breath. Small towns. She stepped a bit closer, careful not to crowd him. You didn't misstep calling me, Julian. I did, when I answered like I was speaking to a contractor instead of a man who once carried me through a storm. Something softened in his face at last, the set of his jaw relaxing. He exhaled slowly. Appreciate you saying that. They stood in that garage, two people from different worlds, connected not by convenience, but by the kind of understanding only crisis can build. The cold wasn't biting anymore. Then Rose offered a small smile. Let's make a deal. No more getting stranded in blizzards. Rose took a slow step forward, her tone steady, sincere, and a little softer than before. Julian, she began, holding his gaze. What you did that night, it stayed with me. Not just the act itself, but how you carried it. You didn't save my life looking for anything in return. And I've been thinking, really thinking, about how I can repay that in a way that honors your character. She saw the flicker of resistance in his eyes and quickly added, I'm not offering charity. I know you wouldn't take it even if I did. She paused, her voice shifting into the clear, confident cadence of a woman used to making big decisions. Blackridge is launching a new regional technical training center outside Helena. It's going to be something special, hands-on labs, innovation programs, real investment in the future of automotive diagnostics. We're looking for someone to lead that initiative, not just someone who knows engines, but someone who knows people, someone with integrity, someone who doesn't cut corners when no one's watching. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a formal envelope, offering it without pressure. I already spoke with HR. The position's called lead, technical advisor, full salary, excellent benefits, flexible schedule. We can build it around Daisy's school hours, relocation help if you want it, or not, if you'd rather commute. Julian didn't move right away. He just stared at the envelope, his rough hands stained with the grease of a long day's work, his breath visible in the cold air between them. And then Rose added quietly, almost as if it were a secret meant only for him, I'm not here because I think you need help. I'm here because we do. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional scribble of pens. And in that moment, standing before a dozen young men and women, Julian Hale wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a mentor, a guide, a man reshaped by fire and frost, now shaping others with quiet purpose. From the observation window above, Rose Miles watched him with an expression somewhere between admiration and awe. 6 months ago, she never would have imagined a man like Julian, stoic, guarded, proud, stepping into a corporate structure. But here he was, thriving not in spite of it, but because someone had finally seen him, really seen him. And because, against all his instincts, he had chosen to step forward. Later that afternoon, the Blackridge Regional Training Facility buzzed, with focused energy, alive with the sound of ambition and precision. Rows of advanced diagnostic stations gleamed under fluorescent lights, their surfaces unblemished and clinical, a stark contrast to the gritty, oil-streaked floors Julian Hale had once known. Where Parker's garage had been cluttered and dim, this place thrived on symmetry and shine, and yet somehow he felt at home here. Dressed in the crisp navy blue uniform of a Blackridge supervisor, Julian moved with quiet authority through the bays. A group of trainees circled around him, hanging on to every word as he leaned over the open hood of a complex hybrid engine. Look beyond the blinking light, he said, his voice calm but commanding. This sensor's not just throwing a code. It's telling you a story. A misfire, sure. But why? That's your job. To dig deeper. To understand. His calloused hands, once only trusted with wrenches and rust, now danced across a projected schematic with unexpected grace. Years of hard-earned experience had transformed into something more, wisdom, and the ability to pass it on. The students respected him, not because of his title, but because he spoke their language, and more importantly, because he had lived it. Julian had once thought the corporate world would chew him up. The meetings, the jargon, the sterile offices, it all felt foreign. But here, in this training center where machines and people alike were being rebuilt, he'd carved out a space for himself. He didn't just belong, he mattered. And the best part? The worry that had once clung to him like a second skin had started to loosen its grip. The hospital bill for Daisy's pneumonia, the one that used to haunt his every quiet moment, was finally paid off. No more juggling overdue notices or losing sleep over what meal to skip next. His daughter, Daisy, was enrolled in a bright, colorful elementary school just 15 minutes from their new home. She had friends, she was learning, and come winter, she was determined to master skiing, despite her dad's cautious objections. The heavy shadows of the past, of Ella's illness, of debt, of frozen nights alone with a broken heater, still lingered. But they no longer defined the horizon. They were chapters, not the whole story. That afternoon, Rose Miles walked into the training bay, her heels silent against the polished floor. She leaned against the doorframe, as composed as ever in a sleek wool coat. But the woman who stood there now was changed. The cold efficiency she once wore like armor had softened, reshaped by something warmer and wiser. "Impressive operation, Mr. Hale," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Looks like you're managing the strategic support protocols just fine." Julian smirked, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek with the back of his hand. "We manage," he said with a mock-serious tone. "Just so long as you don't start sending memos about optimizing spark plug turnover." "Tempting," she replied, arching a brow. "But I'll restrain myself." They shared a chuckle, something light, familiar, easy. "How's Daisy? Settling in?" she asked, her voice softening. Julian's face changed instantly, pride warming his features. "Loves it," he said. "Told her class her dad fixes confused cars and knows a fancy lady who runs the world." Rose laughed, a sound as bright as it was rare. "Smart girl," she said. She watched him work a moment longer, noting how the trainees listened to him, how their eyes lit up when he explained something that finally made sense. The gamble she took by offering him a role outside the corporate mold had paid off. Not just for him, but for her, too. He reminded her of what leadership was supposed to look like: grounded, sincere, and humble. Later that evening, after the facility had emptied, the three of them, Julian, Rose, and Daisy, walked together along a pine-lined trail just outside Helena. The setting sun bathed the landscape in warm gold and dusky violet, casting long shadows across the rolling hills. Daisy darted ahead, chasing the shimmer of a butterfly. Her laughter rang out like wind chimes in the clean mountain air. "She seems happy," Rose said, watching the girl. "She is," Julian replied, his voice thoughtful. "Kids bounce back. They're stronger than we think." He paused, glancing down at the dirt path. "Took me longer," he admitted. "Still adjusting in some ways. The quiet nights, not having grease under my nails all the time. It's strange, but good." Rose turned to him, her expression open. "You don't regret it?" He looked out at the horizon, the mountains standing tall like old friends. "No," he said finally. "I thought I'd be giving something up. Freedom, maybe, or comfort, in the familiar. But what I got in return? Security for Daisy. Time. A future." He turned to her. "You gave us that." She shook her head gently. "You gave it to yourselves, Julian. I just reminded you what you were worth." The silence between them was warm, comfortable, a bond forged in snow and fire, in silence and truth. Daisy came running back, slipping her small hands into theirs. "Can we get pizza tonight? With extra cheese? Daddy says you probably have a magic card that can handle it." Julian groaned. "Button, you weren't supposed to tell her that." Rose grinned, giving Daisy's hand a squeeze. "I think my card can handle some extra cheese." They walked on together, the sun dipping lower behind the peaks, the sky painted in strokes of lavender and flame. The trail ahead wasn't paved. It twisted through unknown hills, through moments yet to come. But it was walked hand in hand, with hope, with choice, and with a quiet promise that whatever storms might come next, they wouldn't be facing them alone. Because in that one blinding storm, a bridge had been built, fragile at first, but reinforced by trust and time. And now it held. Sometimes, it's not the grand gestures that change the course of a life. It's the quiet choices made, in moments of urgency. On a frozen Montana road, a black mechanic named Julian Hale saw a stranger in need and chose compassion over caution. He didn't see race, he didn't see wealth. He saw a fellow human fighting the cold. And that single act, lifting a white woman from the wreckage of a storm, set off a chain of change neither of them could have imagined. What began as a rescue became a reckoning. Two people from different worlds, divided by class, background, and history, found common ground not in similarity, but in shared humanity. Julian's kindness was never about charity. It was strength, integrity. And in the end, it was that strength that opened doors not just for him, but for his daughter, and for Rose Miles, a woman who learned that real power isn't about control, but connection. In a world still struggling with division, this story reminds us that bridges are built when we stop seeing labels and start seeing people. Because kindness doesn't ask what you look like, where you come from, or what you own. It just asks, what do you need? If this story touched your heart, inspired reflection, or simply made you believe in the quiet power of good people doing the right thing, please give it a thumbs up. Drop a comment below. What part of Julian and Rose's journey moved you most? Share this video with someone who needs a little reminder that one small act of compassion can echo forever. And if you want more stories that explore the deep emotions, complex characters, and unshakable spirit of everyday heroes, subscribe now and don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale. Until next time, dear listeners, stay kind, stay brave, and keep building those bridges.